This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
Welcome to the May 2025 episode of RCV Clips, our podcast about all things ranked choice voting. I'm Kelly, a member of the Resource Center staff, and we're rounding out our season today with our final episode before summer hiatus. We appreciate your listenership this year and look forward to seeing you again in the fall. Go ahead and get started with today's episode. I'm excited that Chris and I are both here to talk about the upcoming RCV elections in Charlottesville, Virginia and New York City. Chris, welcome on. It's been a while since both hosts have been on the show together. Glad to have you here for our final show of the season.
Excited to be here for the season finale.
Yes. So we've got a few RCV elections coming up this summer. A new location is implementing RCV for the first time, one that's been doing RCV for primaries since 2021. But let's go ahead and start with Charlottesville, Virginia. What's going on in Charlottesville, Virginia?
Yeah, so Charlottesville, Virginia is the second city or the second jurisdiction now in Virginia to adopt and use ranked choice voting in some of their local elections. To go back to the very beginning, in 2020, the Virginia General Assembly passed a local option law that permits city and county governments to adopt ranked choice voting for some of their local elections. Arlington County was the first place in Virginia to implement ranked choice voting under that law. They started using RCV in 2023. And then Charlottesville has adopted ranked choice voting. They adopted it at the end of last year and will be using it for the first time in their primaries this June, like you said.
We know that Arlington had a very successful implementation process already with RCV in Virginia. But let's get to the particulars of Charlottesville. What kind of RCV is Charlottesville using? And when exactly is their election?
Yeah, so Charlottesville they have a 5-member city council that they're using ranked choice voting for. The way they elect that council is they elect 2 seats in one cycle and 3 seats the next cycle. So this year we're in one of the 2-seat cycles. For the primary in Virginia, even local elections are run as partisan elections. So they're using ranked choice voting in the Democratic primary. If there were a lot of people running in the Republican primary, they would also be using ranked choice voting. But in this case, there's only multiple candidates in the Democratic primary. There's 3 folks running for those 2 seats. And because it's a multi-seat election, they're using proportional ranked choice voting. So the same exact flavor of ranked choice voting that got used in Portland, Oregon last fall is being used this summer in Charlottesville. Their election is on June 17th, and early voting has actually already started. It's underway. They have a very generous early voting period in Virginia. So folks in Charlottesville are already casting their ranked choices in this June primary.
Yeah, fantastic. Are there any other specifics about the summer's election in Charlottesville that are important to know as we go towards June 17th? It's coming up soon.
Well, I think the one thing to sort of dig in on is the fact that they're using this proportional ranked choice voting. Like I said, very similar to what was used in Portland last year. Of course, they're only nominating 2 people. Portland was all 3-seat elections. So the round by round count process, more or less identical. All the details of the math, a little bit different. In practice, in a 2-seat proportional RCV election, which is what Charlottesville is using, every candidate needs to get a third of the vote in order to win a seat, or in this case, to win nomination for the Democratic Party. And the way that works, every voter will cast their ranked ballots, and those votes will get counted in rounds. If any candidate has more than a third of the vote, then they'll have every voter who voted for that person who won will have a portion of their vote go to their next choice. This is called the surplus transfer. So some proportional share, if this person gets 50% of the vote when they only need 33%, every voter will have about 1/3 of their vote go a bit farther. Exact details of the math depend on the election itself. The larger a candidate's surplus is, the more each of their voters gets to have a portion of their vote go to their next choice. So if it's a large surplus, everyone will have a bit more of a say in whoever goes or wherever their vote goes next. If it's a small surplus, then they'll have relatively less say. And this is all just because what we're trying to do in a proportional RCV election overall is make every voter's vote go as far as possible. We do that with elimination transfers. If somebody's in last, they'll transfer their vote to their next choice. That's that. And if there's surplus, we don't want a bunch of votes sort of getting stuck with somebody who's won. It's possible that people who supported them make up a really large share of the community. And we don't want to have anybody's votes get stuck and potentially have the system misrepresent who exists in this jurisdiction. So that's why we have this surplus transfer, so that every voter's vote goes as far as possible so that we actually produce a proportional result at the end of the election.
It sounds sort of to me like I believe I heard someone describe it one time as your vote is like $1 and you have $1 to spend to show support for each of the candidates. And if there's too much money money's not the right word to say there. If there's too much for one candidate, then that portion of your dollar goes forward to spend on another candidate. So I think it's, it's helpful for me sometimes to have a visual like that. We think about $1 going to support different kinds of things. So it's exciting. I'm excited to hear that Charlottesville will be doing this form of ranked choice voting right on the heels of a very successful Portland election in November. So that's exciting news. Now, moving on to New York City, they're not so new to ranked choice voting. So what's happening there?
Yeah, capsule history. New York City adopted ranked choice voting in the fall of 2019. They had a charter amendment referred to the ballot. Voters got to vote on it. And the reason people were even considering ranked choice voting in New York City is the city used to have a runoff requirement for certain elections. Not every single election in the primary, but some elections, you had to get a specific share of the vote. And if nobody got over that percentage, I want to say it was 40%, they would hold a runoff. And there had been a couple instances in the last decade or so of New York City elections where in the primary, nobody got that 40%. And so they had to hold a runoff. Runoffs are expensive. Runoffs generally see a big drop in turnout. So people just weren't thrilled with how that was going. And ranked choice voting seemed to make sense as a pretty efficient way to solve that issue, to get everybody's preferences in one shot and not have to hold a very expensive runoff election sometime later in the summer and have far fewer people turn out for that. So that's why they adopted it in New York City.
Didn't they use it in 21?
So in early 2021, there were a few special elections because ranked choice voting is also required to be used in special elections in New York City. And they used it sort of in the whole hog primary elections in June of 2021. That was their first time using this single winner ranked choice voting that the city adopted in 2019.
So it's funny to me, you mentioned the special elections in New York City. I feel like a lot of times there have been, with new implementations of RCV, sort of exceptionality of special elections happening prior to the first implementation. Thinking about Alaska, thinking about New York City, two really big implementations, and that happened in both places. So never a dull moment around the RCV world, for sure. That makes it keeps it exciting.
Yeah.
So upcoming elections in New York City, which of the elections will actually be using RCV, which means they have to have at least 3 candidates that will be running for office in order to use RCV. Which of the offices will be using that this go round?
Yeah. So in general, in New York City, ranked choice voting applies to primary elections. Again, like Charlottesville, they're partisan primaries. So the Democratic primary, the Republican primary, technically the Conservative Party primary, and a few other local small third parties would all have to use ranked choice voting if they had enough candidates running. And they would have to use ranked choice voting in primaries for the offices of mayor, comptroller, borough president. So one for each of the boroughs in New York City, public advocate, and for city council, all 51 city council districts in New York City. In practice, there are sufficient candidates for mayor, comptroller, public advocate, and about 20 city council districts in New York City to be using ranked choice voting this fall. And that's almost all in the Democratic primaries. There are, I believe, 2 contests in the Republican primary, or in the Republican Party, that also have sufficient candidates for RCV. So that's what's going to be using it this summer. I think the interesting thing, thinking back to the history, is in 2021, it was the same case: mayor, comptroller, or president, public advocate, city council. And then New York City also used ranked choice voting in 2023, but they only used it for city council districts. And that's because before the ranked choice voting measure got adopted, they had adopted a redistricting requirement, like an independent redistricting requirement for New York City elections. And one provision of that was right after those new districts get adopted, you have to hold an election. In 2022, the city adopted new districts because the census was in 2020. And so this triggered for the very first time that new other provision in the city charter. So they held a 2023 election just for those city council districts as well, those newly drawn districts. So In 21, it was the full slate. In 23, it was city council. And in 25, again, it's that full slate of contests.
Great. So just curious, are there city council elected every 2 years, the full council, or
Normally, it's every 4 years. It's just in
4
this one
years?
very specific instance,
Got
because
it.
there were new districts, it was, in fact, a 2-year term from 21 to 23 and then 23 to 25.
So there's been a lot of news about the New York City mayoral elections. What's that going to look like in terms of the use of RCV and in terms of the election implementation side?
It's a great question. I mean, just like in 2021, it's a very competitive mayoral election. There's a ton of people running. There's been a ton of news about it. We're not going to get into all of that here. There's plenty of other places where people are talking about this that who can really give you the details. But it's a huge contest right now. And I think that the thing that's going to be really interesting is normally the person who comes out of the Democratic primary is sort of like the shoe-in to win the general election in New York City. That's not always the case. Rudy Giuliani was the mayor. Mike Bloomberg was the mayor. Neither of them is a Democrat. But in recent years in particular, that's been the case. But what we're seeing right now is there's a bunch of people throwing their hat in the ring to run, either if they don't get the primary, if they don't get the Democratic nomination out of the primary, or who just aren't running for the primary or for the nomination, like Eric Adams, the current mayor, is running as an independent. It could be a really competitive general election. 3, 4 serious candidates might all be vying for voters' votes. So right now in New York City, you can't use ranked choice voting in the general election. It's adopted in the primary because that's assumed that's sort of like the big contest. I think the big question we have is, we'll have a clear nominee from the Democratic Party in June, but what is the race actually going to look like in November without ranked choice voting? That is where I think a lot of the controversy is going right now. But for the ranked choice voting June primary side of things, it just looks like a big competitive election that's bringing out sort of all corners of New York City Democratic Party politics, which is interesting in and of itself.
I do find that really interesting, and have often, and as we've often talked about around our staff, that not having a ranked choice voting general when you could potentially have more than two candidates, 3, 4, 5, whatever that might look like, with independents and some other folks coming into the race during the general, definitely will make a difference. It'd be very interesting to see. You might see some of the spoiler effect. You might see, some, who knows, right? You just really can't predict when that happens. So I'll be definitely watching that and paying attention to that. I do think it's great in terms of, lifting up RCV and its election practices when you have large races where, they're in major cities or states or that kind of thing. So really, like, lets the public understand and know what the processes of implementing RCV are. So that brings me actually to another interesting point that connects Charlottesville, Virginia, New York City. They are both using our software, RCTAB, in some form or fashion to actually count the round by round votes for their RCV contest. Can you give us a little bit of background information on that and sort of what that's going to look like in practice?
Yeah, so I mean, that is a lot of it. New York City has been using RCTAB since 2021, and they've continued to use it since they started using it in the June 2021 primaries. They actually had to hand count their earlier special elections in 2021 because the software hadn't yet been approved for use in the state. We got approved in May of 21, implemented in June of 21. And they've been using it ever since. For all intents and purposes, we expect things to be very similar to past years. With them using RCTAB, they'll have round by round results out about a week after election day, which is sort of lines up with their past practice. I think the one other thing to note is New York City uses ES&S, election systems and software voting systems. So those are the things that are actually scanning in ballots, counting everybody's votes. RCTAB comes in at the very end, takes the data from those scanners and generates that round by round count. And then Charlottesville, like you said, is also using RCTAB. They are using HART voting systems, which has had RCV functionality, but hasn't actually implemented an RCV election until March of this year in Redondo Beach, California. And this summer makes it in Charlottesville is their second time being used in a real world, like a governmental ranked choice voting election. Redondo Beach was a single winner RCV election. This summer is a proportional RCV election. So HART is really getting sort of all angles of the ranked choice voting implementation space this year.
Absolutely. And, just to point out, Clear Ballot also has a component that includes RCTAB, and that was what was used in Portland or well, not earlier this year, actually. It was end of last year. I feel like time is running together. It's going so fast. But, definitely RCTAB is making it possible for these jurisdictions to run the round by round count in a timely manner and produce the results, according to their practices and procedures in their jurisdictions, which is really exciting. We also have a few elections coming up this fall. It's an odd year, so it's typically municipal elections. Who else is using RCV in November?
So we've got a lot of folks, these are all places that are on the books for RCV. They'll only use it if they have 3 or more candidates running. What we've got down is Fort Collins, Colorado would be a new implementation. They're the other new implementation this year alongside Charlottesville and Redondo Beach. They use Dominion voting systems. Would love to see them use ranked choice voting this fall if they've got enough candidates. And then everyone else is a repeat implementation. So we've got a few cities in Utah. Salt Lake City, for example, is going to be using ranked choice voting for their local elections. The Minnesota cities, they're essentially Minneapolis and St. Paul, and then a couple suburbs. So St. Louis Park, Bloomington, and Minnetonka, Minnesota will all be using ranked choice voting this fall. Cambridge, Massachusetts, which has been using proportional RCV since the early 40s, about 1941 is when they started using ranked choice voting. So they've got a number of of proportional RCV elections under their belt. East Hampton, Massachusetts as well will be using ranked choice voting this fall. And then 2 cities in New Mexico, Santa Fe and Las Cruces, and Portland and Westbrook, Maine. That's our list of places that, if they've got enough candidates, they'll be using ranked choice voting this fall. I think the one other exciting thing to note is Portland, Maine, not Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine, could also use proportional RCV for the first time this fall. They would need to use it in a school board election. If there are enough candidates, they will be using proportional RCV as well for the very first time.
Okay, final question. Famous RCVRC question on the podcast. The 2024-2025 RCV Clips season in 3 words or less.
Better than ever.
I love it. I think that's perfect. I was thinking more informative. That's 2 words. I know it's less than 3. It said less than 3 in the question. So I figured that would work. Thank you, everyone, for your listenership this year. We are very excited to bring you a brand new season starting in September of this year. And we'll have 4 new episodes at the end of the year, a few more in the beginning of the year. So stay tuned. Feel free to like and share and all those good things over the summer. Re-listen to some episodes. Hopefully we'll get a few more. What were we calling them, Chris? Clippies as our fans.
Yes, our fans.
I love that. All right. Until next time, until next season, we are signing off. Thanks so much for listening.
Bye.
And now for this month's final round, where we share an interesting bit of trivia, a useful tidbit, or just something we thought was cool for folks to know about ranked choice voting. Here's Matthew Ruberg with this month's final round.
Did you know that RCTAB, our RCV tabulation software, played a crucial role in the 2024 elections? Here's RCTAB by the numbers in 2024. The software counted ballots in 5 elections across the country. 4 of those were municipal elections. A little over 10,000 ballots in Westbrook, Maine, just under 40,000 ballots in Portland, Maine, about 20,000 ballots in Arlington, Virginia, and around 330,000 ballots in Portland, Oregon. The 5th election, RCTAB was also used in Maine's 2nd congressional district, where nearly 400,000 votes were tabulated. In total, in 2024, RCTAB tabulated 1,375,359 ballots in 2024. And if those numbers aren't enough, our team has been busy improving the software even more. We're getting ready to release the newest version of the RCTAB software, version 2.0. This upcoming version of RCTAB includes 48 separate updates. Those updates change 253 files. They add 32,880 lines of code while removing 4,426 lines to boost performance, enhance security, and make it even easier for administrators to use. That is this month's final round.
Thank you for joining us today for our May 2025 RCV Clips episode produced by the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. You can find our show anywhere you listen to podcasts. Don't forget that we'll be on a hiatus for the summer and we'll resume new episodes in September with an exciting new season. Make sure to subscribe to the show for the latest episodes and updates, and please take a minute to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. For more information about RCVRC and ranked choice voting, check out our website at rcvresources.org. The production of this podcast is supported by the generosity of our donors. Donations can be made directly on the website, and please don't hesitate to contact us with any questions at donate@rcvresources.org. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at RCV Resources and on Facebook and LinkedIn at Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at RCV Resources and on Facebook and LinkedIn at Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at RCVRC. Our theme music today is Flutterbee by Poddington Bear. And until next time, I'm Kelly Goss on behalf of the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center.